Yes.
There are clues in your early context that suggest you might have walked the path that you've walked in your life, but there's also clues that suggest you absolutely would never have done what you've done.
Yeah.
So, taking me back to that early context,
Yeah.
what do I need to know about that environment, the influences of that environment, to understand how you ended up where you are today?
I think it all starts with, the family I was born into were like very successful academic people. So I was born in a town called Quincy, Massachusetts. It's just south of Boston, Mass. And, my mother, father, and two sisters are like brilliant minds in like the academic sense of the word, just like brilliant. One of my sisters has gone on to win two Pulitzer Prizes. My dad's won a Pulitzer Prize. And this is not even flex, but to give you a sense of the people in my life, my other sister like has a PhD and she like worked out of a Harvard lab. My mom is a professional writer, and then there's me. When I was growing up, I could have done well in school, but I didn't want to. It was sort of like my form of rebellion was being a bad student willfully, and I would like go out and party with my friends and just was like trying to be sort of like a bad kid in a way. And also like the town I grew up in was it was not a place where academics really thrived. It's like a really working class, like hard and tough place. I mean, Quincy's becoming much, much nicer, but it was a little bit of a tough place. And I sort of wanted to be like an edgy, like tough guy. And so I'd like get into street fights and get my ass kicked. And like, I'd like stay out drinking with my friends. But what it did is it set me up for like colossal failure by the time I got to college. I got into college because my mom, the professional writer, wrote my college essay, and my grades were horrible in high school. In fact, so bad that when I sent off my application, the school got in touch with me, and they were like, "Hey, your grades are not really what we're looking for, but boy, that essay was so beautiful. We're going to give you a chance." And so I get into college. I go to the University of Massachusetts out in Western Mass. It's like where a lot of kids, where I was growing up, that's where they went to school. It's a big party school. And I just immediately bombed. First semester, like I got a 1.016 GPA, which it should have been like a 0. I basically didn't go to class. I was involved in this riot. So at some point, our football team, which was a team that no one cared about, even the people who went to the school, we didn't care about it. No offense to the Minutemen, they're very good now, but at the time in 2006, they weren't. They made it to like this conference game or something. This is like not big time D1. This is like D1 AA. So like very high level football, but not going to be on TV or anything.
Mhm.
And the college, the student body, again, they don't really care about the football team. But for some reason, when they lost this game, it just like instilled this need to riot on campus. And it was like concentrated in this one area of campus where I happened to live. And I like went out there and I was like breaking windows and being this horrible kid, and the security cameras everywhere recording you. And it got to the point where at the end of the semester, there was like this witch hunt to find the people that had been involved in this riot. And there was like the website had posted, the college police website had posted all these images of just faces of people in the crowd that were a part of it. And anybody could anonymously name people if they saw them. And it was like everybody got expelled. And I found pictures of me, and I just got my grades back, 1.016. And at the same time, I'd been telling my brilliant parents, yeah, I'm doing great in school. Things are going really well, getting good grades. And I had to tell them, like, actually, it's the opposite. And I'm probably going to get expelled if I don't withdraw. So my dad comes out to the school and he like sits down with the dean, who also says John has all these violations of living in the dorm, like noise complaints and being a jerk. We're going to kick him out of the dorms. Even if he stays at the school, he has to live off campus. And my mom and dad are like, you're coming home. We're done with this. Like, you're an adult and you can either like live at home and go to school or get a job, but like you're going to be an adult. And so I come home.
At
and
what age?
I was 18.
18.
So I come home and I was living in my mom's basement in Quincy. And I remember the first couple of weeks I was home, I actually felt mad at my parents. Like, how dare they make me withdraw from the school, even though there's all this information that like it's completely my fault. But I had like an epiphany when I was literally in my mom's basement, when I sort of realized like, oh, this is my fault. Like, I have created like a habit pattern and a way of thinking that's put me in my mom's basement with no direction. Like, I've been gifted all these opportunities that I've squandered. And something sort of changed in my head where it was like, I don't want to be a screw up. I don't want to be that. I'm looking at my family members as being so successful. And I just was like, I can't be that. I'm suddenly becoming self-aware that that's the path I'm on. I'm going to be the guy that like floundered everything and didn't amount to anything. And so I just made it simple. I was like, I'm just going to like go to a local school, get good grades, and like graduate from college. That's going to be my focus for now. And I did that. I went to a local school. I got my grades up. I actually transferred back to the school that I withdrew from to finish out my couple of years in college. But it was like a drug, like having a goal that I was working towards, like doing something that was worth my time and like studying hard. I was like struggling with school, but I worked so hard. I was in the library all the time, like feeling like getting to feel what it feels like to be working towards a goal and achieving it was like really addictive for me. And so by the time I was like in my last year in college, I actually ironically had no clue what I would do post college. It was sort of like, well, the goal was just to graduate college. I don't really have a clue what's next. And I thought about briefly becoming a lawyer or something because I was studying philosophy and English because I like those two subjects and they sort of fit the mold. But I had always sort of had this calling to serve in the military because just some friends of mine in high school went off to serve in the military in 2006. Like they went to Iraq and Afghanistan. But I wanted to do something really hard in the military because I needed like a big goal, you know, and it like graduating college was this goal that I had achieved. And I was like, I want to do something hard in the military. And that's when I got turned on to the SEAL teams. And the cool thing about the Navy SEAL teams is virtually anybody can apply to be a SEAL. You know, you have to like have the right physical fitness, you have to be a citizen. There's a few things, but basically anybody can try out. But it's only those who survive the training that become SEALs. And it's a really small percentage of people. And it just really was the thing that was like, wait a minute, if I do that, if I go through like this baptism of going through this rigorous training, I'll become a guy that will no longer be viewed as like the screw up in high school who sort of got it together with college. I'll be able to reinvent myself. I'll be able to serve in the military, which is something I felt the calling to do. It's a career that I can kind of progress into, and it's a big frickin' challenge that's going to require a whole bunch of training and prep before I get to go. And so I kind of just shifted my goal from graduate college to become a Navy SEAL, and everything fell in line. And then naturally after that, I became a YouTuber, which is an even longer story. But basically, I became a SEAL, and then I got hurt, medically retired, and then I basically posted something online that went viral. And I love telling stories, as you can see from this long intro. And I just kept telling stories, and now I'm here. So, but it started with like setting a goal and achieving it, and which sounds so basic, but I think a lot of people go through life just sort of doing stuff because they were told to, or they just sort of fell into it. I found like setting a goal that's really consciously something you care about for whatever reason and working hard to achieve it, it like organizes your whole life. And so my life, starting with coming home from college and being in the basement, has been a series of set a goal and shoot for that goal. And that's all that matters.
It's interesting because even before that, there was something that it seemed to happen to you in that basement, which I consider to be the starting place, which is awareness.
Yeah.
This like self-awareness. And with that self-awareness came responsibility. You said, actually, I need to stop blaming my mum and dad.
Yeah.
I have a role to play in this.
Yeah.
And that's really, really hard I think for everybody to be truly aware of how you might be contributing to the circumstances of your own life.
It's a harsh truth when you realize it's your fault, or a big part of it is your fault. But that's what self-awareness is, like taking responsibility for the good and the bad.
And what's your relationship been like with responsibility? And like, what's your view on the importance of that broadly?
I would say that when I was, pre-basement moment, I was definitely in the mindset of playing the victim. And if something bad happened, it was somebody else's fault and not taking responsibility for anything. I was the guy that would come home from school and I'd tell my mom, like, you wouldn't believe it, we had a test today and Joey got a 50. I got a 65, but Joey got a 50. It's like, you're sort of like, that's the way you approach it versus like, I failed the test. But when I sort of decided I would graduate college and organize my life around that and then become a SEAL, I realized that it's not enough to simply just say, I'm going to do this thing. Like, you need to own like the entire process. And like, for example, in SEAL training, there were a couple moments where like I myself failed miserably, catastrophically at like tests and opportunities to be a leader. And I just like squandered it in a way. So the way SEAL training works is it's very reputational. Like as you go along in training, it's like the closer you get to graduation, the closer you get to being a real SEAL. And so your instructors, those are active duty SEALs, and they're no longer viewing you towards the end of training as being just some like, oh, candidate. Now it's like, you could be my teammate. There's not too many of us. And so it changes from you aren't going to make it to you better do a good job because I might need your help, down the line. And I remember in the final part of training, there's this confidence exercise where they basically expose your class to tear gas, which is something that's pretty standard in the military. And the only thing they say is like, this is it's all about mentality here. It's a confidence booster. It's going to suck. It's going to make you want to feel like you're dying from this gas. And it's like a long exposure. And they set you up in this like square. You're all just standing, you're kneeling shoulder to shoulder, if you will, out in this open field on San Clemente Island in California. And all the instructors have their gas masks on, and they have these pool sticks like that you would swap like trash out of a pool. But at the end, they have the CS grenade canisters. And they're like, all right, they put their masks on, they fire off these CS grenades. This big white smoke comes out, and they hold out the pole, and you get covered in CS gas. And all you have to do is not run. Just stay here and take it. That's the whole point. And I ran. It was like a fight or flight instinct completely. It was like and it was instant. It wasn't like, oh, this is really bad. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? It was like instantaneously. I ran. I had to get tackled by one of the instructors because I was just out. I wasn't even thinking. It was like, and nobody else ran. This is the end of training. And so afterwards, it's like I was brought into the amphitheater. There's this little theater where they would teach us classes about ordnance and whatever. And they were like, Alan, stand up. And all my peers know I did this. All the instructors know I did this. And he just goes, the main instructor, he's like, Alan, you're a fucking pussy. Sit down. He goes, you're a fucking pussy, and I never want to serve with you, and neither should your classmates. Sit down. And that was it. And I had to, from that point on, for the rest of training, wear these it's almost like a bikini over my shorts. And it was like the worst moment ever because I've made it so far into training, but I knew, and also, by the way, at this point, we weren't even home. I wasn't able to go home, see my wife. We're out at this island for a month. You work 7 days a week. You are in training until you're done. And the only choice was like, own the fact that you did that. Don't make excuses for it. Like, let this show people my actual strength, which seems funny because I did the thing I'm not supposed to do. But instead of like running from it, literally own it. Take responsibility for what you did and show people that, you know what, I'm prepared to show up for work every day wearing these fucking trunks and be looked at as a lesser than to demonstrate that I'm not.
There's something really important in that. That's really really also critical to business, but just really critical to anyone that's a professional or in a relationship, which is if you make a mistake, you get the second opportunity, which is how you respond to the mistake you
Absolutely.
made. And in fact, so many times in business, when I was running a marketing business, we'd have clients and we might drop the ball in some way, but we could actually make the relationship stronger than it was before the mistake by how we responded.
Yeah.
So making a quick phone call, apologizing, taking responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there definitely were some people that did carry that sort of like stigma into the teams because right after we finished this, we kind of went into the SEAL teams. But I do think that there was definitely some people that, and I'm not even tooting my own horn, I really think this happened, that as a result of that moment knew they could like trust that I was prepared to sort of like, I'm going to take responsibility for me. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to be the best teammate I can be. Even at my lowest, you're still going to get the best version of me. And that doesn't mean I think I'm better than anybody else. It just means I'm an adult. And like, I think that's a big part of being an adult is responsibility is ultimately owning those mistakes. And sometimes your mistakes are painful and public and awful. And that's the most important time to own them. And like you said, like that's your opportunity in some ways, not just to rectify the mistake, but to become a stronger, better version of yourself. And I think that my mistake in college was a series of mistakes. My first semester of screwing it up and getting sent back home. But it was only when I recognized that it was my fault and I had to own that I was able to graduate college and try to become a Navy SEAL. And then in the process, like have the CS grenade happen. But in some ways that made me a better SEAL, So I think that like in failure comes the best opportunity for success, which is something that I certainly didn't coin, but it's the truth.
What is the Navy SEALs? Because, around the world, I think people are aware of the term Navy SEALs,
Sure.
but we don't actually know fully what it is.
Yeah, so every branch of, I think, basically every military in the world. This is a broad generalization, but it's usually the case that virtually every branch of every military has some form of specialized unit that carries out special operations. It's the stuff that, the Call of Duty video games and modern warfare, those are based on like the idea of specialized combat units that go out and do these kind of difficult and high stakes missions. And so in the US, you have the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, and the Air Force, and each of them have like their like respective special operations divisions. Like you have Marine Special Operations in the Marines, you have the PJs, the pararescue jumpers in the Air Force. So there's multiple. But of all these special operations units in America, of all the different branches, you could make the case that the most, and I'm gonna get some flack from people that disagree with me, the most, let's just say, well-known and potentially most skilled, and I say that carefully because of course there are other groups like the Green Berets who are incredible at certain things, but the most skilled at multiple disciplines is very likely the Navy SEAL teams. And it's because the acronym SEAL stands for Sea, Air, Land, so SE and AL. The idea is, even though it's under the Navy, which is sort of like maritime and water, the reality is that the SEAL teams are a special operations group that can insert into virtually any environment, sea, air, or land. They can also use multiple insertion platforms, whether it's diving, jumping, going in on land. It's like a highly versatile special operations group, whereas a lot of the other special operations groups, not just in the United States, but internationally, are kind of specialized in certain geographies. Like you have mountain warfare specialists, you have like the Dutch have this incredible diving unit, but the SEALs are like, we do everything.
Mhm.
And they also sort of came into prominence. They started in the 60s under JFK. They really came into prominence post 9/11 because they were being sent out into the Middle East, which is, it's a landlocked place. But this Navy Special Operations Unit was being very successful carrying out, kinetic operations all across the Middle East. So it's like a very famous jack of all trades special operations group that, especially after the Bin Laden raid as well, that sort of made them celebrities. But even before that, they were very well known as like the jack of all trades special operations group.
And how long is training? How long does it take to get through training and pass the other end?
Broadly speaking, I would say it takes about 2 years, but realistically, it takes a little bit longer. So you have, there's two ways to become a SEAL. You either go in as an enlisted person. So there's the enlisted component of the military, which is somebody basically without a college degree who just like raises their hand and just serves. Like that's like the grunts of the world. Those are the enlisted community. And then you have the officer side, which is somebody who at a minimum needs to have like a college degree to apply. You go to like officer school. And in the SEAL teams, there's like a tiny, tiny number of officer SEALs and a massive number of enlisted SEALs. But they're two very different pathways into training. If you go the officer route, it's practically like a political appointment just to get an opportunity. Like it's so, so difficult to even get a chance to try out that what you get, and it's because there's just like a handful of spots available. That's really all it was. So you have all these people on the enlisted side who actually have college degrees and could easily like become an officer in the military who, let's say, have other opportunities that they could pursue with their college degree, but they want to be a SEAL.
Mhm.
And so you have this big number of people that are electing to go be enlisted to try out to be SEALs. And that's important because it makes the enlisted side super competitive. You have like these professional athletes and you have like Olympians and you have like the best college athletes and you have MMA fighters and wrestlers and then like the random people like me who have no resume, and you all just show up for the class in San Diego that technically is 6 months long, but there's like, before you even join the Navy, you need to basically compete for a spot to even have a chance to try out. And there's a whole application process before you've joined the Navy that can take years. And then let's say you get your chance as an enlisted person. They're like, okay, you're going to get a chance to go. Well, first you got to go to boot camp. That's 2 months in Chicago. And technically you can fail out of it, but really you won't. It's sort of like a suck it up and get through it. But then at the end of boot camp, at least when I went through, you go to this other school, which is like a prep school. It's another 2 months in Chicago. Mind you, you haven't even started training yet. This is like potentially a year of pre-Navy, and now you're 4 months into like you're in the Navy, but you're not really in SEAL training yet. You go to this prep school where you like learn how to swim and run. You already know how to do these things, but professional coaches work with you. The Navy invests a lot of money in getting you really strengthened up and mentally strengthened because following the prep school, you go to San Diego, where you go through what's regarded as like the hardest part of SEAL training, which is it's called BUDS, BUDS. And it stands for Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL School. And it's basically, imagine whatever you think of as boot camp, like military boot camp, make it not 2 months long, but 6 months long, because most boot camps are about 2, and make it like 1,000 times more difficult. It's really the same concepts. It's like intense, grueling, physical, emotional, and mental like torture for 6 months. And that's the part where everybody fails out and drops out. That's like if you made a movie about SEAL training, you'd really only focus on the 6 months of BUDS training. And in fact, you'd only focus on the first 2 months because that's the most physically challenging. And then once you finish that, you go to advanced training. You're still not a SEAL yet. It's another 6 months of like learning how to actually do the job. So BUDS is like, can you handle it? Advanced training or SEAL qualification training is, I'm going to teach you how to shoot a gun with surgical precision. I'm going to teach you how to jump out of a plane. I'm going to teach you how to like use this technology because you need to know how to do the job. So learn the job. And then after that, you go to like, or we did anyways, I don't know if they do this now, you go to like a language school for a month, or you'll go to like a medical school or some sort of school to give you additional qualifications. And then you go to your team. And so all told, you have about 2 years from I want to be a Navy SEAL to I am now a Navy SEAL. 2 years is usually the mark.
And what's the similarities that you noticed between the people that made it and didn't?
The thing that stands out, honestly, and this is what is pretty universally true, although there's some outliers, is the folks who show up to BUDS, the candidates who show up to BUDS that have like an incredible resume. There was a guy that showed up to training who literally played for the Arizona Diamondbacks. He's like 6'5", looks just like a god, and he's so humble. Like he's this big, strong, professional baseball player who I actually have a memory specifically of playing with his character in a video game. And like there's other people who are like professional football players and all that. And he washed out so quick. And a lot of the other guys with big resumes, like the sports and big accomplishments, they typically wash out really, really quickly. And it's not because they lack the physical to do it. They don't. They definitely don't. It's that and this is generalizing because this is not true of everybody, but let's take the guy who played for the Diamondbacks. So this person is used to being, generally speaking, the very best person at what they do their whole lives. And it's not because there's anything wrong with them. It's just sort of a truth. That's how you became a professional baseball player. That's how it works. In BUDS, your instructors don't fucking care about who you were. And it's like a point they make. They don't care at all about what you've done before. In fact, if they even suspect that you think you're special because you have some bullet point on your resume, like playing for the Diamondbacks, they will torture you and see if you really got it. They will single you out and specifically make you feel terrible and tell your class to like, look at this guy, he can't even do push-ups. You play for the Diamondbacks, you can't even do push-ups, even though the guy's doing push-ups just fine. But he's like, look, that doesn't even count. That doesn't count. Do another one. Get in the water. Do this, do that. It's a mind game. But the guys like me, who I went to BUDS and I'm like, I literally am a joke compared to the people that are here. I wasn't in great shape relative to my peers. I'm certainly not a professional athlete. The only thing on my resume is, well, I nearly flunked out of college, but then managed to graduate college. That is the extent of my resume. I played a little baseball in high school. And so for me, I have very little to lose. Like either I'll make it and that'll be amazing and I'll get to do the thing I want to do, or I won't. And people will say, that's about right. The folks that go in that have the resumes on some level, they expect to be really good, even if they're humble. And everybody in their personal lives also expects them to make it through, because who wouldn't? He played for the Diamondbacks.
Expectation, being
It's
the key word.
brutal. And the course is too long to simply gut your way through it. The level of physical discomfort that you experience in BUDS is so unbelievably high that it's not you got to want to be here. That's the way they say it. You got to want to be here if you want to make it through. It's you need to have something to hold on to in your brain that overrides the discomfort. And it can't be, oh, I need to make everybody else happy. I need to live up to expectations. Maybe that's strong enough for you. For most people, it's not. Like when you are at like your absolute lowest, like what do you hold on to? And it's for people like me, it was like, I have to prove myself to myself. I want to prove to myself that I can do this hard thing. Like it was not even about serving in the military. It was accomplishing this goal because I've set my mind to it and I want to believe that I'm the guy that can set goals that are hard and achieve them. And so in my worst moments, I would go to that place where I'm like, this is worth it to me. But for other guys, it's not. And so at the end, when you graduate, you look around and it's like a ragtag group. of like short, sort of weird looking guys that don't in any way embody like what you would think of as like, I mean, some guys do. Some guys are unbelievable studs, but it's like a ragtag group of guys that just didn't quit. And a lot of it is because they had some sort of chip on their shoulder that internally drove them, and it allowed them to persevere when things got so bad, because things get so bad in buds.
If I were to meet the guy in his mother's basement and
Yeah.
then meet the guy who qualified from the SEALs training,
Yeah.
in terms of their mentality, like their psychology, how would they be different? What is it that, what evidence does the guy that graduated from SEAL training have that the other guy doesn't have? What is that? What's the difference?
I mean, not just to like shamelessly cycle back to this idea of responsibility, but I'm going to do that. Before, when I first got to the basement, I've just arrived, I was really not even able to see what a mess I had made of my life. It wasn't like I knew I had screwed up and was blaming other people. It was more like my default setting was, this is somebody else's fault. Somebody did this to me. Like, I actively remember being furious with my mom and dad for making me withdraw from college when I literally was about to get expelled. I had a terrible GPA. I couldn't afford to live in the dorms. I had shown there was no evidence to suggest I would succeed in college. It wasn't until I was like home in the basement and the sort of like living in my mom's basement with no direction that it just sort of naturally happened. I was like, wait a minute, it's you. It's not them, it's you. And it seems so obvious now, but it took falling to the bottom. And also, by the way, kudos to my mom, because she's a single mom. She didn't give an F. She was not like, don't worry, you'll figure it out. She was like, no, you're gonna get a job, or you're gonna move out or whatever, and you're also gonna pay rent while you're here, and that's it. Like, this is your fault. And at first I'm mad, but it's sort of like it became this arduous thing I had to overcome. So it was like no self-awareness, none, and genuinely blaming the world for my problems, to like probably, if anything, an extreme on the other side, where like, if you haven't already noticed, I'm like talking about the CS gas thing that I mentioned to you earlier.
Mhm.
That's something that if that happened to other people, I don't know if they'd talk about it on such a public platform, especially just in the SEAL community.
Mhm.
Like, reputation is such a big thing that even talking about things that other people know about, but that cast you in sort of a bad light reputationally, I think people would stay away from saying that, like, but for me, I view it as a strength to highlight not only the things that I'm good at, but the things that I've made a mess of and screwed up, because it shows other people that like, I'm secure. So it's like ultra self-aware and secure in my image, the opposite as the basement kid. And it took basically falling to the bottom, being home, no new opportunities in front of me. Other people are off at college succeeding, and here I am in my mom's basement, for it to sink in that like, if you want to fix this, you have to start with saying it's my fault and then do something about it. And it worked.
This idea of rock bottom, it's so interesting, and it sounds pretty tragic that sometimes people do need to go to the bottom on their own
Yeah.
to realize that, as the quote says, the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of making a change.
I never heard that. That's
I had
actually a
when I
great
was
quote.
like 18 years old, and I was just dropped out of university, and I saw someone on YouTube say the pain of change happens when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of making a change. And this kind of speaks to why some people, sometimes when you listen to their stories, it wasn't until they hit the basement that they were able to look themselves in the mirror and then take actions in the right direction. But also sometimes when you try and help someone and you prop them up, like if your mother had gone, listen, here's some money, and here's some, you don't have to pay rent.
Right.
She would be propping you up a little bit and keeping you
Enabling me.
away. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about the kid that's listening to this right now that can relate,
Yeah.
or the person in their life, they might be in a job or whatever, that can relate to knowing that there's something not quite right in their life.
Yeah.
Maybe they're at a point where they can start to look themselves in the mirror and take responsibility. But do they have to go to rock bottom to start to change their life?
Well, I think that part of the reason, or I should say, this is more of a general statement that kind of answers this. I, in a way, was fortunate, because when I hit rock bottom, I am a person that does not have, what is it called, paralysis by analysis. I'm sort of an impulsive person, for better or worse. And so for me, it's like, once I hit that rock bottom, it wasn't hard for me to sort of quickly find a good North Star, which the first one was college. I'm gonna do college, right? And then when I was nearing the end of college, by this point I've sort of righted the ship at this point, but I wanted a new goal. It was like, oh, SEAL training, that checks some boxes. It's like, I want to serve, check. Like, it's a super hard goal, check. I'll have to work for it. Like, it offers me a chance at reinvention and rebirth, check. Okay, good. Like, I jump to that. That's what I do. I think there are plenty of people, and this is my guess, I don't know if it's true, who maybe have already hit rock bottom and they want to make a change. They know it's their fault or whatever situation that they know they've contributed to it,
Mhm.
but they don't know what to do next. And there's so many choices. Think about it. If you're at rock bottom, in some ways, you have every choice in the world to make. And I think that one of the things that I certainly preach when I talk about this at all, which I guess is in situations like this, is you don't need like a perfect idea. You just need something that checks enough boxes for you to be worth doing. So for me, it was like, okay, I'm in my mom's basement. I've done this to myself. I am the reason I'm not at school. I'm the reason that like my parents are embarrassed about their son. It's my fault. What do I need to do? Okay, well, I should graduate school because that demonstrates that what happened at UMass is fixable. I can graduate school. I can do it. I'm not dumb. I can do that. Okay, fine. Got to go to school. That was it. It's like, it checks a box, so do it.
I think it was Jocko Willink that said to me, his friend had called him and was going through a difficult time in his life, divorce, lost his wife, lost his job, etc. And Jocko said something, words to the effect of, when you're lost in like a military context or whatever, you need to start moving. It doesn't
Yes.
necessarily matter which direction you move in, but you need to start moving in a direction. And that was, I was thinking about that as you said about this idea of like paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
People, they might be at rock bottom, but they just don't know what to do. So they're just sat in the same situation. Certainty in that context is sometimes better for people than the uncertainty of what happens if I.
And also you got to figure it's sort of like a self-perpetuating problem too, where if you, let's say you've hit rock bottom, even if you don't know it, and you're like, oh, I want to fix my life. I want to do something with my life. Let's say the kind of
Mhm,
generic rock bottom. Well, let's say you get paralysis by analysis and you're not able to sort of like pick a path and you go nowhere.
mhm,
That only reinforces the idea that oh, you screwed up again,
mhm.
but you haven't. There's just too many choices and you're allowing too many factors to be at play here. Jocko, however he said it, is dead on. And there's another way that's talked about in the military, which is an 80% solution now is oftentimes better than a 100% solution tomorrow. And it's all
Interesting.
about like speed over certainty. In the military, it applies a lot of
Mhm.
times. But that's the way I think people should generally, not always, but generally look at their lives if they haven't quite built anything yet, whether they're at rock bottom or just starting out, like they're young people and they're, or whatever age you're at. If you feel like you need to make a change, like you said, the pain of staying the same is greater than making a change. If you're at that point, you kind of know it. Think about what matters to you, whatever it is. Like I like to equate it to when like you're in the shower by yourself and you're just having unfiltered true thoughts. Like ask yourself, what do you really care about? Like honest to God. Like forget what society says you should care about. Let's say you really just want to be famous. And that's the actual core. And you don't even know why, but that's what you want. Well, guess what? Listen to that part of you. It's not vain. It's a thing that matters to you. Similarly, if you're like, I want to be just rich, great. If that's a real motivation for you, like at your core, in the shower, it's just you. If that's really what drives you, great. Those are boxes that must be checked for something to be worth doing.
Mhm.
So it's like have your shower thoughts and be real with yourself. Like, what do you really actually care about? Not what society says, not what you want your family, none of that stuff. For me, honestly, the reason the SEAL thing really paid, I wanted to do it ultimately, is I wanted people to say, that's John Allen, the Navy SEAL. Because to me, it was like I had been the black sheep in my family because of me. I had discovered this. But it's like, oh, his sisters have done this. Oh, his dad's done this. His mom's done this. And then there's John. I wanted something that sort of overrode the mediocrity and failure. And I felt like, what better thing? What more honorable thing? And it also, I wanted to serve. That's another check. It's a big goal. That's difficult. That's check. But ultimately, it was like, I want people to know that I became a Navy SEAL. That mattered to me. And you know what? It flies in the face of what Navy SEAL instructors tell you, which is you shouldn't do this because you want to be a Navy SEAL. You should do it because you want to serve the country. And like, that's true. And what else are you going to tell your students?
Yeah.
But if you really want to be real about it, you got to find your real motivation, and that box must be checked.
Must be checked.
Yeah.
So I pause on the must be checked because once you become the Navy SEAL
Yeah.
and everyone's saying that's John Allen, the Navy
Sure.
SEAL, does your motivation disappear or does it become something else? And I think it's really honest, but also quite unorthodox advice to say, listen, if you're in the shower and you're going, I just want to be rich so I can prove those people
Yeah.
wrong, or I want to be famous, prove these people wrong. Um, it's unorthodox advice to say to follow that.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I just completely agree.
Yeah.
I agree because sometimes you have to have a hypothesis fail you or some kind of idea fail you for you to scratch the itch. And that's why I was focusing on the side of ticking the box.
Yeah.
It's going to stay there.
Yes, it
Like,
is.
I don't know if you can go to therapy or do ayahuasca or something to get rid of that thing. But for me, until you pursue it and have it fail you or succeed,
Yep.
it's going to stay there.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, exactly what you said, if that box goes unchecked, you might in your life eventually convince yourself that you never needed to check that box. But at some point in your life, when it becomes too late or you're about to die or on your deathbed, you will have regret. And I can actually speak to a specific instance in my life, which I had checked a box by this point, but I had one that I hadn't checked. I was in Afghanistan in 2014, and we were in this alleyway, and a grenade came over the wall, and it detonated next to a whole bunch of us, and I nearly bled to death. And I had this moment where I can't pull the tourniquets off of my kit that are rubber banded to my chest for quick access to stop the bleeding. But I was so weak and like losing my vision. We're in the middle of this gunfight. I couldn't get them off. And I realized as I'm sitting in this alleyway in the middle of this like horrible place in Afghanistan, like the town was very kinetic and dangerous. And I'm waiting to either be shot by the enemy, who we know is on the other side of the wall that could be coming around, or I'm going to bleed to death, or there are RPGs being fired blindly in our direction. It's like, I'm about to die, 100%. I'm actively bleeding out, or I'm going to be shot. And that was running through my head, there was a couple thoughts. There was one that was kind of funny now, which was, I was like, I wonder if my obituary will say, Jonathan Allen killed in action, or John Allen killed in action. So that was going through my head. But I also, in addition to that, I had this really acute sadness that I hadn't started a family yet. I didn't have kids. I was married. We've been married for several years. And my wife and I, we'd sort of talked about having kids before that deployment. But we were like, oh, we'll have time. And I'm sitting there in this alley bleeding to death or expecting to be shot to death. I'm at the end of my life. And it was like, holy shit, I wish I had a child. Yes, that's horrible for the kid. They lost their dad. But like, that was a box for me. I wanted a family. What was the first thing I did when I survived this and got home? We started a family, you know? So it's like, that's sort of an extreme example, but I do really believe that a lot of people have boxes that are going to go unchecked. But to your point also, just try to do it and fail. And believe it or not, you actually checked the box.
Yeah. That's true. That's actually really, really true. Yeah. And yeah, it's so interesting that because I've never actually heard someone give that kind of advice before. What people say is like, find your why, and they often are quite judgmental about what's motivating you.
Sure.
So the only like accepted motivation is something like, I want to serve my country,
Right.
or I want to change the world.
Right.
But actually most of us are either like driven or dragged, as I say, which it could be, yeah, like driven is okay, you're very conscious of what's driving you and you're in control. But then being dragged is the insecurity, it's the shame, it's that I want, my siblings are better than me and I want to say fuck you to my parents, whatever it might be. Very, very, very interesting. It's also even more interesting that you ended up where you are today. So you get medically discharged from the military after the Afghanistan
It was
tour?
not immediately after, but basically between that and some mental issues I was having, I was pushed to see a psychologist. This is like years after. So 2014, that injury happens. I survive, obviously. And I ended up getting surgery to sort of like, my shoulder was banged up and I got fixed up enough to deploy again. But I was just not fit to serve. Physically, I was really struggling to keep up. I had some issues with my shoulders and my knees. I have shrapnel in my leg. But ultimately, I was recommended to a psych in the military because they're like, dude, you are not like a sane person. Things are not going well for you. Like, close friends of mine just sort of said, I don't think this is working out. And I was very angry. I had like, now I can say it. It's like I had very stereotypical, or whatever you want to call it, PTSD. Like, I had not dealt with the near-death experience in Afghanistan and sort of how that went. And so I ended up going for a medical retirement, which was driven in part by the physical injuries, but also by like mentally I wasn't there. So I get medically retired at the end of 2017. And, you know, it's I never really had a plan, you know? It's like I knew I was gonna get medically retired, which just means, like, you're gonna get out and there's gonna be, like, this amount of money you get paid, you know, it's a retirement. It's not really enough to live on realistically. You're gonna have to have a job. And, you know, I basically I got out at the end of 2017 and I went on LinkedIn and I'm like, I guess that's where you get jobs because that's what I think people do. And I was like on LinkedIn and I wound up randomly connecting with this guy named Jordan Selleck, he was living in New York at the time. He's this former investment banker who it just so happened at the time that I was on LinkedIn doing this like kind of weird job search that his best friend was a transitioning fighter pilot. Like he was leaving the military, going to the private sector, was struggling with the transition, which is very common in the military, making that jump to the civilian world. And Jordan, who's like this very entrepreneurial guy, he was trying to prove to his friend, whose friend's name was Austin, that like, you must be alone. Like, you're so successful being a fighter pilot, like you're gonna find a job. And he was like, he was doing this exercise where he was reaching out to like random veterans on LinkedIn and being like, hey, what are you doing like with your transition to the civilian world to prove to Austin that like you're basically complaining and you can go find a job. You're not a, but he found like one, nobody really got back to him because they didn't know who he was. But I got back to him and I'm like, actually, you know what? I just got medically retired. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I got kids. I'm stressed. I don't know. Didn't know this guy. And so Jordan quickly went from trying to prove a point to his friend to he was like, oh, well, hey, why don't you like come to New York and I'll just like introduce you to some people in my network. And out of that was born this charity that Jordan and I actually started called Elite Meet. It's still around today. It's like a networking event. It's a series of networking events for transitioning military veterans and private sector, you know, hiring managers to meet and get jobs. So I did that for a little while. Ironically, my job became running a charity that helped other vets get jobs and instilled in me. He was a big believer in Gary Vaynerchuk's style of social media, that sort of like bombard the internet with content and be like all in on content. And Jordan, he even had a similar sort of, he was similar to Gary V. And I found it like really fascinating, the idea of social media and content creation, because when I was in the military, I didn't even have, or I might have had a YouTube account, but I certainly didn't post on it, didn't have social media. But with Jordan, we began using social media content to drive donations for this charity we're running together. But at some point I wanted to do more like with social media. I was doing storytelling, but narrative storytelling, like
Mhm.
written out stories about military stuff to try to generate donations. And I was like, yeah, I want to do something for myself with social media, like build a brand for myself. And I committed a cardinal sin, one that I was very aware of. So this is self-awareness, but doing it anyways. Um, in the SEAL teams, and really, I think in special operations generally, despite what you see in terms of books written and like movies made about SEALs, and you can Google SEALs, and there's like 78 examples of SEALs that are publicly talking about being Navy SEALs. There is like this code of conduct amongst the active duty community that you don't talk about being a SEAL. That's not what you can say you were a SEAL. No one's telling you you literally have to lie about it. But being a SEAL is not something that's yours. Being a SEAL is you were allowed to enter a community of people that were like fighting for a common goal together, struggling, bleeding, dying together. Like the strength of the brand of SEAL, the SEAL brand is built literally on people dying. And so you can't then leave the military and say, hey, look at me, I was a Navy SEAL, because that's for personal gain. You can't do that.
Mhm.
It's sort of a gray area.
I get it. Yeah.
I began posting about I was the quintessential, look at this guy,
Mm.
Mr. Navy SEAL. At first, it wasn't that way. It wasn't like one day I was like, guess what, guys? I'm a Navy
Yeah, yeah,
SEAL.
yeah.
But it began as like oh, I'm going to just like have my own accounts and sort of tell stories about my experience as a SEAL to push people towards Elite Meet. But then quickly, as these began to succeed, not really, but kind of, they got like 1,000 likes here or there. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I like began leaning a little more and more until finally I was like full send, like the guy that you're not supposed to be. This is like in 2018, 2019. And dude, I got disowned by the Navy SEAL community. I mean, like hard.
Give me specifics when you say disowned.
I at first did not catch a whole lot of public at first, I think I was doing it and people sort of were like, well, he's doing this charity, Elite Meat, that's helping SEALs, it's helping vets. But gradually, as I sort of drifted farther and farther away from that into just like John the Navy SEAL, mind you, I'm not giving up anything sensitive. It isn't like I'm talking about stuff that's like problematic. It's really just doing some of this,
Yeah.
pumping my chest. I began receiving just some of the most painful messages I've ever gotten in my life. It's different than getting hate. As MrBallen on the internet, I certainly get hate from time to time, but it's different because they don't know me. It's like they see somebody on the internet doing something they don't agree with or like, and so they speak their opinion. I'm sure you're familiar, but it's not personal. It might feel personal at first, but you get used to it. This was actual SEALs who I knew, who wanted me to know exactly who was sending this message, like writing me messages to be like, hey, I used to think of you this way, and now I think of you this way, with like detailed explanations of, and talking about how at the team, like we all talk about how much you fucking suck, basically. And like I lived in Virginia Beach at the time, which is where the SEAL team, I was SEAL Team 2, that's where I was at. And so it's a big town, but it's where like a huge concentration of SEALs were. And during this time, I would like go out to like the grocery store and I would see people that I know. These are not, oh, I think that guy could be a SEAL. It's like, oh no, I served with him. I know exactly who that is. And they'd like mean mug me and my family at the grocery store or the gym. Because remember, this is not like a normal group of people. This is like a group of highly trained killers, of like operators, people that like go to war. They're not afraid of conflict. And I have done something that in many ways is like tarnished their brand. Not their brand, that's not how they look at it. Tarnished the brotherhood. It's like I'm being selfish.
Mhm.
And I was reviled. They hated me. I got regularly 2 to 3 messages, email, Instagram, wherever. I get phone calls, voice messages of people leaving me just the most deep cutting, personal, like, this is how I know you, and this is what's being said about you, and this is how I feel about you. It was horrible. But luckily, I had already had the experience in my life, the CS gas thing, the coming home from college thing, of fairly quickly realizing that no matter how I justify this, no matter how I justify why I drifted into this arena, ultimately, I knew what was going on. I knew the line, and I knew when I crossed the line of being, no matter what the public thinks about SEAL content that you see on the internet, I knew amongst the huge majority of people that will never be public about their service, the active duty guys and the retired guys, I had crossed a line for them. And I was not dumb. I would have been just as upset if I was them, still active, looking at a guy like me. But instead of like getting mad at anybody or looking for retribution or trying to justify it, I deleted it all at some point. I remember there was a night I'm like sitting on my couch and I got a message from somebody that I would have said was one of my very close friends. And it just said, "You suck." That's all it said. But that sounds stupid. But this is somebody who's on Team 6. This is somebody who I specifically trained with and was like very close with. Like his wife and my wife were close. And like, I know what the context of this message is. It's way more than "you suck." It's, we're not the same anymore. Like, you're different and I look down on you. And I was like, I can't do this. There's no amount of success that I could possibly achieve doing the Navy SEAL content stuff that would be worth what I'm going through right now. And so instead of being like, I'm going to just act like that didn't happen, I just removed all the content, save for a couple of very small specific things. And yeah, I hadn't lost the itch for making content, but it was like, I can't do anything with regards to being a SEAL because that's not worth it to me. And I don't want to do it. It felt wrong. And after trying things that never worked, like sketch comedy and like following trends, at one point I was, my lowest moment, my worst one was there was a trend on TikTok briefly where people would tell like sort of weirdly traumatic stories, not traumatic, but like intense stories, but with auto tune. they'd use the feature in TikTok that was auto tune, and they'd like sort of sing it as auto tune, but it would be like about the time they got like mugged. And
Okay.
so it's like it's the contrast is so extreme, it's sort of
Yeah.
interesting. I did something like that, and I made it, and I was like, I cannot post this. This is like the worst thing I've ever made. But nothing worked, and I remember thinking like, okay, you know, I don't have a clue what I could do that would be interesting. And actually, I remember I had these 2 documents in my computer. This is again post deleting everything. I'm like trying to make it on social media with something different. I had this one document that was like ideas for content that were not SEAL related, that were like totally divorced from that, the sketch comedy, the auto tune, whatever it was. And I literally had exhausted all of them. But I had this other document that I didn't even know why I had separated this topic, but it was all I wrote on it was Dyatlov Pass. So personally, I am interested in the strange, dark, and mysterious, the tagline that's become the MrBallen thing. Basically unsolved mysteries, but not like, don't think true crime necessarily. Think like world level mysteries, like what's out there? Is there life out there? Like, why is this portion of Antarctica blacked out on Google Earth? Like the deep, like scintillating stuff that no one really has an answer to. I've always been drawn to that stuff. And there's a really famous mystery called the Dyatlov Pass. And it's about these hikers in the 50s, these 9 really experienced hikers who are going for what's called their level 3 mountaineering test, which sounds sort of like run of the mill. But in fact, in Soviet Russia in the 1950s, this was like master mountaineer. Nobody had level 3. This is like the top. If you did this, you're like the best climbers in the country, if not potentially the world. This is a big deal. And the way you pass your level 3 is you and the people taking it with you, there was 9 of them, you have to map out this route through this really rugged part of whatever mountain you're gonna use. They use the Ural Mountains, so big, snow-swept, like huge icy mountains. And you map out this course that like checks the boxes of difficulty, and you're effectively timed. You have to start on a particular day and time, and they have people set up along the way, the scheduled checkpoints, if you will. And so they brought cameras with them. This group. This is again 1952, I think it was. And so these young 9 hikers who were like so excited to do this test. No one's stressed. They're so pumped. There's a couple of couples in there. They set off on this journey, and I think they reached the first checkpoint. I forget what it is, but they didn't make it to whatever second checkpoint or whatever it was. And there was a protocol for the people who were sort of sponsoring this test, that were part of the checkpoints, that knew this. They knew what was going on, where if they missed a checkpoint, there's like this big search that goes out to make sure they're okay. Even though there's some expectation that they might not make a checkpoint by like a day, because it's a difficult test. But the protocol is like really extreme. As soon as they go missing, it's like the army gets involved, and they go and follow the route to find the hikers. So they miss the checkpoint. This protocol is enacted, and not only are there pictures that we will get from the hikers, but there was cameras that came with the search crew. They follow the trail that they're supposed to be on. This is, again, there's no trees. It's just like the tundra. It's like ice and snow and mountains. And they come across this mountain off in the distance, and they see on the windswept side of the mountain, basically halfway up, are these tents that are just these like canvas tents. You barely see them, but they're situated right in the middle of the slope, which is like strategically one of the worst places you can place these tents. So immediately they're thinking, 1, it has to be the hikers, because who else is out here right now? But 2, why in the world would these incredibly talented hikers or mountaineers, why would they ever pitch their tent there? This is the most hazardous part. The wind can whip you off. You either go to the top and over, or you stay to the bottom. Let's say you begun hiking up that mountain, you get halfway and you're like, I can't make it. You better go back down and make your camp down there. So they see these tents, they're in the wrong spot. They go up to the tents, and the hikers aren't there. They're not in there. There's pictures of this too. The tents inside had stacks of clothing neatly folded and placed in the corners, like as if they left their clothes behind. And the tents themselves were cut open, like with a knife, but somehow they deduced that they had been cut open, but from the inside. So presumably one or multiple of the mountaineers chose to cut open these tents in like negative 50-degree weather. And then there were all these prints in the snow that led down the mountain. And some of the prints were bare feet, some had one shoe and one barefoot. And it's all 9 of the hikers. They spotted these prints, and they follow the prints down the hill or the mountains, a big space, and they find this little crops of trees. There's only a few areas in the Ural Mountains, in this part of the Ural Mountains, that have trees, and there's this little group of trees. And when they get to the trees, they find 3 of the hikers, and they're all deceased. And there's one who's basically almost naked, wrapped up on the ground. There's pictures of this. There's one who I believe was draped over one of the branches up in one of the trees, and then another one that was also on the ground as well. And there's these deep scratch marks in the tree, like gouges on the tree, as if some animal had been scratching at this tree. And all 3 of these hikers are deceased, and it looks like exposure, but they're not really wearing the right clothing, or they're missing pieces of clothing, but they're all deceased. There's more footprints that lead away from those 3 about a mile, kind of back in the direction the search party had come from. And there's this big snowdrift that created sort of like a snow cave underneath it. And the footprints lead into the snow cave where the other 6 hikers were, and they're all deceased as well. Except in there, the hikers had seemingly exchanged clothing, and they know this because the women were wearing men's clothing and vice versa. Some of their clothes had trace levels of radiation, and some of them had parts of their face removed, it looked like. Lips, nose, ears. It almost looked like surgical precision removal. They're all deceased. And one of the injuries, there was a person in there who their chest had basically been caved in, and it was deduced that the impact it would have taken, there's no lacerations, just their chest was caved in. The impact would have been equivalent to like a speeding car smashing into at full speed, but there's no sign of anything that could have done this damage. And so they're all deceased. And so the Soviet government, they launched an investigation. And during this investigation, they discovered that there was a huge military exercise, a Russian military exercise taking place in the Ural Mountains, who had no idea about these hikers. They have no clue that the level 3 mountaineering test is going on. That's not even on their radar. And they're 15, 20 miles away. And one of their senior commanders, on the same night that it's believed the hikers all died and whatever happened to them happened, he began noticing all these strange lights in the sky over the Ural Mountains, going up and down and moving all around, to the point where he actually thought it was another country, a foreign country. Are they invading us? And he literally thought it was like an invasion of Russia. And he sent out messages to say, hey, what's happening over there? Having no idea that he was pointing to the one spot where these hikers were. So during this investigation, they discover that families are clamoring for information about their lost loved ones. Nobody has any idea what's going on. And suddenly the Soviet government says, we're going to shut this investigation down. All we know is that the 9 hikers who died from an unknown, unnatural force. Sealed. And to date, even though there was actually a recent reinvestigation done in 2020, it's remained like one of the great unsolved mysteries, in part because it's got this like, the Russian government sealed it and there's more information. What do they mean, unknown, unnatural force? But there's pictures of the tent, of the bodies, of all this stuff. And so I always thought that was a fascinating story, and I love stories like that. And I was at this water park in Pennsylvania with my family, an indoor water park. And at this point, I've exhausted the one list. Nothing's worked on social media. And this new thing, TikTok, had sort of begun to happen. I didn't really even know what it was, but I was like, maybe I'll try posting on there, because it's a new platform. Maybe that'll work. And I was like, but I bet I want to try something else, because these ideas haven't worked. And so, like, in my hotel room, I tell my wife and 3 kids, like, go down the water park. I'll meet you down there in a minute. And I just pull out the phone and I do a 60-second rendition of that. And I was like, hey, at the end of this, you're going to Google 2 words. And I tell this brief story about this crazy mystery. And I'm like, that's called the Dyatlov Pass mystery. That's the name of the pass they were in when they were found. And I post this video to my account that has no followers. It's like the MrBallen account. There's a story behind that, but it's a nothing account. Post it, and really no expectation that this is going to amount to anything. I leave my phone in the room because I'm going down to the water park. I can't waterproof my phone. I'll be with my kids. And when I came back up a few hours later and I picked up my phone, I couldn't even get it to turn on. Like, it was like, I was like, oh, is it on? Is it power dead? And I finally get it on, and it's just like, brrr, like notifications like mad from this video. There's over 5 million views on this video. Mind you, everything I've ever posted collectively has maybe been like 100,000 views. So this is like massive virality, but it was utterly divorced from SEAL stuff. This is like pure, I think this is fascinating and I love telling stories. And that wasn't like, oh boy, here's a business opportunity. It was more like, oh my God, this is so cool. I'm going to tell more stories like that because this is what I like. And I just began making story after story that sort of fell in line with that. And it happened to fall at literally the start of the pandemic. So it's like suddenly everybody is not only on their phones, but they're on TikTok. And everybody on TikTok is like mostly kids dancing. And also the account just blew up like mad. I transitioned to YouTube and I've just been telling stories ever since.
So first and foremost, I have to ask, what do you think happened to those hikers? If you
Man,
had
I
to
don't
guess?
know. I don't know. So they reopened the investigation, like I said, in 2020. I don't claim this to be true, but I think it might have been in part because of the virality of that
Mhm.
video. Suddenly, there's this newfound interest of people googling at the Outlaw Pass, and they concluded that there was an ice slab that broke off and killed them. But it's like, how does that account for like the clothes being exchanged, the potential radioactive nature of their clothes, like what the military guy saw with the lights? There's too many things that don't get explained. It is true that like when you become hypothermic, when you become truly hypothermic and you're nearing like the end, basically, you're about to die from exposure. It's you become warm to the point where you're hot. You actually take your clothes
Oh,
off.
really?
Yeah, that's a well documented thing. So you could say, okay, so they've pitched a terrible place on the mountain. They're being exposed to the elements. They're basically freezing. Maybe as skilled as they weren't really prepared for the weather, and so they became hypothermic. And let's say maybe an avalanche or an ice slab did come down, and maybe they got hit by the ice slab, and now they're hypothermic. They're taking their clothes off, but it's like, okay, what are all the marks in the tree? You know, why are their clothes radioactive? What did the government mean when they said an unknown, unnatural force back in the 1950s? What were the lights seen by the military guy? There's too many unanswered questions. So I admittedly am a huge skeptic, and if anything, creating this content has only made me more skeptical because there's so much stuff that gets put out that's not true and it's just like totally made up. But this remains one of those stories that just sort of makes you wonder, like, is it possible there's stuff out there that we don't necessarily understand, like supernatural forces or extraterrestrials? Like I'd say this is a story that certainly opens the possibility, but I also would be perfectly fine to hear that actually turns out here's all the things that happened that makes that completely reasonable. Maybe there was a leak of some kind that like leaked out radiation or who knows what. So I'm open to it, but I think it's one of the few cases that seems like could make a case for paranormal.
And my next question is, as you reflect on the journey of your life,
Yeah.
from the basement to the SEALs, to then producing the SEALs content, getting disowned from your SEALs brotherhood because of that, then stumbling across this TikTok thing,
Yeah.
then YouTube and everything else that's happened. When you look back and go, like, how can I give anybody advice on how to stumble into their thing based
Mm.
on the actions, the intentional actions that I took that brought me here?
So one of the things that my wife and I often find ourselves saying is like, "Wow, like the timing on things is just amazing. We're so lucky with timing." And I'll give you a couple examples. So when I was getting medically retired from the military, there was a time where I actually was going to be pushed out, like actually cut from the military, and it was going to be like a year earlier than when I actually did. And so it was like, hey, you're going to get medically retired, and it's happening tomorrow. And I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't have anything lined up, and that's actually when I began reaching out and I met Jordan, and it was like really quickly we came up with this elite meet thing.
Mhm.
But then after the elite meet thing actually had some legs and we're getting donations in, we're putting these cool events on, and I have like this feeble little salary coming in from it plus my retirement. I'm like, okay, I can keep things afloat for a little while until I figure out the next thing. Right as that happened, so out of necessity, I've found a way to make an income within like a month of needing to have an income. The Navy says, actually, we're going to extend your contract for an extra, I think it was 8 months or something. And so suddenly I had the opportunity with Jordan and Elite Meet, but also got 8 more months or 10 months, six, I forgot what it was. Like it was less than a year, but it was a lot more time in the Navy. But I really didn't have to do much in the Navy. I
Mhm.
was already on the medical discharge way. I basically had to go to work and like be there like a couple hours a week. It was not hard. But it meant I got paid through the Navy. And so it allowed me really to not worry about pulling money from Elite Meet and pulling a salary. I can just grow Elite Meet with Jordan and get paid by the Navy. It's like the Navy is incubating Elite Meet.
Mhm.
But Elite Meet wouldn't have existed if I didn't have that, oh my God, I'm getting out in a month. I have to do something about it.
Mhm.
And so it feels like, oh, the timing's so perfect. Like I started Elite Meet with Jordan, and then I was granted this extra time with the Navy. It fostered this company, it incubated this company. But no, I've sort of always looked at my life as being like, man, there's just such amazing timing on things. Like I just feel like we're so blessed with the timing. Like when like the TikTok thing, like I just so happened to like be making this video when suddenly everybody's on TikTok at the beginning of the pandemic. Yeah, that's insane timing for sure. And I'm not denying that that's a timing thing. But also I'm somebody that is perfectly willing to take a chance and do something. Like I don't get stuck on, is this a good idea or not? It's like, I'm just going to try this thing. And it's the people that are sort of willing to quickly check a box and do this thing that will be in a position to where timing can benefit you. If you're constantly like, I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking of, things are going to pass you by. And so I forget what the question was, but essentially the advice I would give is like, really, it's sort of what Jocko said. It's this idea of like, you just got to start moving, because it's amazing what doors begin to open up for you if you're already on the move. If you're stationary, they don't open.
It's interesting because as you were talking about timing, I was thinking, that's not what I think the answer is. I was thinking that timing is one of those things you see in hindsight and go, gosh, wasn't that perfect timing?
Sure.
But for it to be perfect timing, you need to be the kind of guy who's willing to send their kids down to the pool with your wife and make a TikTok video on a platform you know very little about,
Yeah.
doing something you've never done before.
Right.
And it's actually in that moment that I think that's your like moment of brilliance. That's when your life pivots.
Yeah.
Because genuinely 99.9% of people would not be making a video on a platform they don't know much about,
Right.
on a subject that they've never made a video about before.
Right.
And your story is like riddled with those moments where, like, even responding to the guy on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
you said most people didn't reply.
That's right.
But
That's
I
true.
responded, and then you went and met him in New York or something,
Yep.
and that creates. So in hindsight, yes, it looks like timing, but actually it's that you were in moments where you were lost, you got moving, you did something, you had a bias towards action.
Yeah.
And failure is feedback. Feedback is knowledge. Knowledge is power. So it's interesting because when you're talking about like your bias of just like do something, aim at something, what it appears is happening there is, even if the thing fails, like some of the things you tried failed, at least you're getting feedback.
True.
And then the feedback's informing what you do next. Like you said, I did the SEALs thing on LinkedIn. You learned some stuff about social media there. Okay, it didn't work out how you wished, but you took that into the next test.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, when I looked at your story, the defining thing is just a willingness to, in fact, I'll be honest, a willingness to embarrass yourself
That is
sometimes
it.
and be bad at something.
You know, it's funny you say that because I literally have like sort of a mantra that I've developed that I can't claim as something I came up with, but I definitely find myself living by it now. And that is, it's do things that scare you. And I'll quantify that or qualify that. So actually, Will Smith, the actor, has this great thing he does. He goes on Oprah, I think it was Oprah or some talk show, and he talks about his experience skydiving.
Mhm.
And you know, it's this unbelievable like monologue, this impromptu monologue he gives. But he basically is like, you know, my family was like, yeah, or my buddies were, we're gonna go skydiving tomorrow. And it was like, oh yeah, that'll be so crazy. We'll go skydiving tomorrow. But he's like, we're not gonna really do that. And then it's like the next morning we get up and he's like, yeah, let's go get breakfast, guys. They're like, no, we're gonna go skydiving. Like, let's go skydiving. And he's like, wait, we're really doing that? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, oh my God, like, I don't want to go skydiving. I thought we were just like saying it last night. And he winds up, you know, going with his buddies to the actual, you know, airfield, and they're like signing the paperwork. And he's like, guys, are we really doing this? I don't want to do this. Like, oh, come on, it's not so bad. And so before long, he's like in the plane, up in the air, attached to the instructor. And he's like, they open the door up and they're like, all right, it's your turn. And he's like, I'm sitting on the edge and I'm having like this full blown crisis. Like, I don't want to jump. I'm terrified of jumping. And the instructor is like, all right, Will, we're going to go on 3. 1, jumps.
Really?
And he was like, the second I left the plane, the fear was gone.
Yeah.
And it was just this exhilarating experience of soaring through the air, of skydiving. And he was like, when I landed, he's like, I suddenly understood that there's always been this aspect in my life that I've sort of seen in other ways in my life, but it's the best things in life. This is Will Smith, not me. The best things in life are on the other side of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've taken that as, you know, like becoming a Navy SEAL, for example, when I decided to do it, like there's a huge amount of fear, and not so much fear of failure. It's like it's fear of like not stacking up. Like when I got there, like I was so intimidated by the people around me, but I knew if I could just like not let the fear overwhelm me, that the reward on the back end would be so high, you know? Or even take, you know, I just did we did a live tour with 15 shows. I actually am terrified of public speaking. I've had instances in my life where I have frozen up publicly giving a speech and literally had to put the microphone down and leave. I've had that experience, and I'm volunteering to do a tour with thousands of people. But it's the way I look at it is like the things that you don't want to do, you'll be indifferent to. The things that you do want to do, you'll typically have if it's a big enough thing, the best things in life, so to speak,
Mm.
you will have some element of a fear response to it. Now, of course, if you're scared to go down in the basement because you hear an intruder breaking in, listen to yourself, don't go down in the basement. But when it comes to like goal setting,
Mm.
kind of going back to that idea of shower thoughts, right? Everybody has something that they just really want to do. And it's not even necessarily motivated by one particular thing. Maybe it's some action they want to take. Maybe it's talking to a friend that they've blown off for 10 years, or it's public speaking or whatever it is. But they know, even if they don't admit to it, deep down they know fear is the thing keeping them from doing it.
Mm.
It's fear of embarrassment. It's fear of failure. It's a fear of all the things that make us human. It's the very select number of people in this life that are still able to say, I'm going to still do that thing that scares the fuck out of me, that have the best and most fulfilling lives. Not always, but they often do. And like, that's why we look at like Will Smith, for example. That dude, very likely, just because I'm referencing him, he's probably had to do things that were so uncomfortable in his life. To be an actor at his level, it's like, hey, perform in front of everybody right now and don't screw it up. You know, it's like pressure and performance. It's like that dude has faced fears his whole life. Yeah, he's using skydiving as an example, but his life is very likely a product of a guy who faces fears.
Mm.
But it's the fear knowing that if I do this, there's something big on the other side. And so I preach to my children and I try to live this idea of do things that scare you. And literally the live tour that we just did was it. I was having like an existential crisis before we began. But the second I took the stage, it was like, oh, this is great. So
It goes back to what you were saying about when Will jumped out of the plane.
yeah.
All the fear was there before he jumped.
Oh, yes.
And just like you walking out on that stage, the fear, you're tormented before.
Oh, yes.
I always find before significantly harder in every way, which isn't always as bad. But
Yes.
before is horrible. And also when you were talking, I was thinking, you know, it's really, either way you're making a decision in those moments. Like when you were thinking about your live tour, the decision is, do I accept the unchecked box?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I accept this mental torment that I'm going to inflict upon myself?
That's very true.
And I think, yeah, even when they talk to people on their deathbeds and stuff, the worst thing is the unchecked box, not
It's got to be.
not that I walked out and put the mic down and walked off.
Yeah, like I look back at the fact that I was in San Francisco at a dinner where I literally froze and put the mic down and walked off. I looked at that as a catalyst for why I was so scared to do public speaking this time. And it ultimately pushed me to do it. I don't regret San Francisco. I'm glad it happened, but only because I faced it later on. I would be so embarrassed and I would harbor like my pain forever if I never tried again. But yeah, it's like you don't regret the failure, you regret not trying.
How do people misunderstand you? Because they, like you, they see you on a screen.
Sure.
And they consume a certain type of content you make. They probably don't know the full context of your life. But how do you think people have misunderstood you?
Oh, good question. I would say, and this is not even to try to curry, favor with my, former SEAL brethren, but I think that even when I was posting, and this is really just specifically to the people that really disown me, who still very likely do, my intention when I was posting the SEAL stuff before MrBallen thing happened, it was never like, I'm so great. It was more like, I want to do something with my life. And this feels like an opportunity. And I know it's sort of like questionable, but when you're no longer in that insulated team room, when you're in the wolf pack, so to speak, it's easy to view the rest of your life as being, I've become a SEAL, I can do anything I want. But like when you're cast out or when you leave and you're by yourself and you got to like figure out your new life, it's really difficult to imagine how you're going to do that without leveraging, the biggest thing you've ever done. And so I think that the one definite specific thing is I never made that content because I literally believed I'm this special guy and like everybody better look at me as like Mr. Navy SEAL. I was very aware of the fact that I was a junior SEAL relative to the other people that had served, and like my experience was minimal compared to others. So I think that some people think that I actually somehow believe that I'm a superhero, and I didn't then and I don't now. I'd say now, sort of the MrBallen side of things, there's like a practical thing, which is as the sort of Mr. Ballen thing has grown to where it is now, to where it's a pretty recognizable thing in the genre of the strange, dark, and mysterious. Um, it's been really, really challenging for me personally to balance my life with my wife and my 3 kids who I adore, and sort of like, responsibilities with content. I mean, we have a recording schedule, we have things that I sort of have pledged to do. And as you know, with content creation, there's not really an end. You just sort of keep doing it. I think that by no means am I saying like, oh, this job is so hard. People better sympathize with me. Hardly. Like I understand the privilege. But at the same time, like I started making content and it was like an outpouring of content constantly. I was making 5 videos a week sometimes that are like 25 minutes each by myself, like shooting it, editing it, everything. It was like it would take me about 26 hours or so per video over 7 days. So it's like, yeah, I really wasn't sleeping. I became like a raging alcoholic. I became like horribly overweight because it was like everything got pushed aside to make videos. And then as I realized that like doing content at that fervorish rate was really taking a toll on my physical health, my mental health, and definitely my relationship with my wife and kids, I began to sort of make an exchange. It was like, I'm going to do less content for more time with my family. And loads of people got that. It isn't like the masses were like, dude, you're a jerk. But I think what's happened now, and it's sort of a product of success, is we've reached a point, not just me, but like we have a team that's pretty sizable. We have an amazing studio. We have publishing division. We have this, we have that. Like we've reached a point where I think people view me as like this corporate guy out to get money.
Mhm.
When in reality, like you were talking before the show, like you're like, it's weird people say you're so successful when I don't even know what I'm doing.
Mhm.
Like I'm still very much the guy that randomly made a video that went viral on TikTok. And so one of the harder things for me has been as the audience grows, which I'm happy for, it's like you really have to understand that there are people that don't like me anymore. Like
Mhm.
have taken an issue with me. And it's always this idea that like I'm somehow like this money grubbing, like corporate guy that is only in it to make money. When in reality, like, as you've probably seen with this interview, dude, my default is I love telling stories. I love this genre, always have. And like, I kind of like being my own boss to a degree. So it's like, it checks a lot of boxes for me.
Do you ever worry that you've got your priorities wrong? In
Hmm.
Well, when I say that, I really mean because when you're a content creator, like we both are,
Yeah.
like you say, you're constant. It's constant. It's constant. It's constant. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel in terms of
No,
there's not like you get off this train at some point. If you get off, you fail
that is how it
effectively.
works.
So how do you think? Because if I said to you, you're going to be doing this forever, like you're going to be doing what you do now for the next 30 years.
I think that I've actually probably reached a point in my life as a content creator where maybe I haven't come to it exactly the way you've just laid it out, but I'm definitely not currently in this for money. If anything, I'm in it for I get a lot of enjoyment out of literally telling stories. I mentioned to you pre-show that doing the live tour was so much fun because I got to actually interact with these people that show up as numbers on my YouTube videos,
Mhm.
but they're real people. And it's like, it was so much fun, like fulfilling for me. I literally told Nick, my CEO and my manager before the tour started, like I would have paid to do the tour. And now especially, I would have paid money to have that experience, to put those shows on. But yeah, like looking ahead, it's like I've sort of reached a point which is like I was never really in this for fame or money, or I definitely was in it for like the idea of being successful, no doubt. I want to be successful and things come with that are in the money and fame and all that. But like I ultimately I'm a guy that just like tries new stuff. I've done lots of new things. I sort of reinvented myself several times over, but I do really well when I just sort of have a new goal.
Mhm.
And I thrive in that environment. And like for me, like when the Mr. Ballin thing started, it was not how much money can we make or how successful or how big of a business can we make. It was like, can I make another video that people like? Can I keep doing that? And that became the goal. Can I repeat interest in the videos?
Could you see yourself ever stopping?
Yes and no, for sure, because I think that I'm also capable of saying, "And now I'm good. I'm gonna go do this completely new thing with my family and ride off into the sunset."
You think you're capable of that, saying that?
I do,
How
actually.
many subscribers have you got total? It's like, I mean, your main channel's got almost what, 10 million
It's about 10. I think that I think we've done the math and we looked at all areas, all platforms, including podcasts, it's probably somewhere around 20 to 25 million.
Say 20, 25 million subscribers. You would be okay with just walking away and saying, could you see that reality in the future?
Yeah.
Is there anything that it would take for you to get there? Is it like, would you need, yeah, is there anything, any catalyst you think?
You know, yeah, actually, it's funny you bring this up because I've sort of mentioned the live tour a couple times. If I had to be honest about my deeply internalized, unchecked box from the time I became an adult, well, from the time I like joined the military, it was I always just had this interest in giving a big public talk for no other reason than to simply conquer that moment. My dad is an incredible speaker. He's done some pretty big talks, and I've seen him speak, and he's so good. And I've always known that I'm a good speaker. I can tell stories. This is something well before MrBallen. Um, but I viewed it as something that was so terrifying that I would never actually do it. I was the guy that had that thought and was like, I'll live with an unchecked box. And I would tell myself it's because I don't really have the content to deliver a talk. I have the ability, but no content. And that was my excuse. But then the Mr. Ballen things happen. The Mr. Ballen thing sort of takes off, and suddenly it's like, oh, you have the audience, you have the content, you have all this stuff. It is now a decision. Are you going to do it or not? And I, over the last couple of years, have like really mentally tortured myself to work myself up to be like, I'm not only going to do the live stuff, but I'm going to do a whole tour. Like and I told you before the show that I wanted limited production value. A part of that was because I wanted it to be me with a spotlight on me with a microphone to make it as intense as it could possibly be, because I felt like if I didn't start there, I'd be worried I didn't fulfill the thing I've always wanted to do, which is like be the guy with the mic and captivate people. And so I did that. I feel like I genuinely accomplished this thing that I really didn't think I would ever actually do, because fear was too much. I wasn't able to get past it. But as a result, coming back from that tour, and this is going to sound so like egotistical, but it's like we come back from tour and we have the graphic novel we released, New York Times best-selling graphic novel. Like, it's beautiful. I'm so proud of that book. You know, the tour was like statistically, financially, whatever you want to call it, huge success. You know, the YouTube channel, the podcast, everything's going great. But I suddenly had no more genuinely deep-seated, unchecked boxes. I don't. The only thing I have is like a real desire to be a good dad, but there's not a specific way to quantify that. Like, but by doing the live thing, which was so in the back of my mind, now that it's been checked, I could do 50 more live tours and it would never be the same as the first one. Like, I could right now, if they said, hey, there's 70,000 people out there, go tell a story impromptu. I could do that right now. And it'd be stressful as hell, but I'd do it. I don't have, and this is again, not meant to be egotistical. I don't have a goal anymore. I've now reached a point where the only other thing that I wanted to do was pitch for the Boston Red Sox. And I think that ship has sailed. That'd be the one thing I'm not gonna be able to do. But I don't really have like the big audacious goal. I'm sure I'll find one, and I'm looking for one. But I've sort of reached a point where like I adore the storytelling aspect of storytelling. I just do. I'm doing it right now. But I also adore my family and my kids, and I want to have a full life there. And by the way, I definitely have a good balance right now. But to your point, could I do this for 30 more years? The answer is no. I could do this for a time, and I'll put all of my energy into it. And when people hear, my fans, when I say like, I genuinely care about what you think, I'm in the comments, I read Reddit, I read painful things on Reddit, I read all this stuff. It's because I genuinely care, because this was never about building a business. That's a product of the thing that I love to do. It's a product of telling stories and loving to do that. But yeah, I don't have the deep unchecked box. And I hope to find one, but right now it's like I feel like I'm just sort of doing stuff, and I need to find the thing, and I don't have it. I'm so fortunate, so blessed, and I love my life. I love that, but I've done the box checking, and I don't know what's next.
Everybody needs an unchecked box, don't they?
I feel like you do. It keeps you moving, keeps you like thinking about that horrible disaster with the little submarine that imploded. Horrible thing. And I was reading about it, and like the people that go on these deep sea excursions are typically like billionaires. It's people that literally have every resource known to man. You can do basically anything you want within reason. And it's like, they can't figure out what to do now because everything, like to us, if it's like, hey, do you want to go buy $100 million yacht today? Like, we can't do that. Like, I can't go buy 100. Maybe you can. I can buy $100 million yacht. But it's like, imagine it's very difficult to do this. I'm sure billionaires could tell us, if you could buy anything, it's like suddenly everything loses its value. At least the things you can buy. It's only valuable to us because we can't have it.
Mhm.
You know, it's like, I can get this nice of a car, but I know I can't get a McLaren.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this one special because I can't afford this one.
Mm.
But it's like the billionaires, it's like, oh, well, all I can do is like adrenaline now
Yeah.
because it's money doesn't put up. So I've sort of reached a point, not billionaire status even close, but it's like, it's hard to figure out what I even want to do besides knowing wife and kids is like a really big thing for me. It stems literally from nearly dying in Afghanistan, like really cherishing the fact that I have a family. But it's like, I also cherish what I have here with Ballin Studios. I'm waiting for the next big sort of unchecked box to appear.
What's your journey like been with your own mental health? Because you talked about
Yeah.
PTSD. You talked about becoming a bit of an alcoholic as well at one
Yeah.
point. What's that journey been like? What's that sort of overlaid across your story?
Yeah, I've really struggled with my mental health, in particular, kind of like from military service was a big part of it. When I was medically retired, so 2014, I get hurt in Afghanistan. I really didn't. I thought I dealt with it because you have to go see a therapist and stuff. Post deployments, you go speak to somebody. But I sort of was just sort of playing the game to get through it because I just wanted to deploy again and be a part of the team again. Um, it wasn't until later on that I deployed a second time and I went to South America. Um, and I remember not giving much thought to the deployment before I got there. I remember thinking, like, compared to going to Afghanistan, we're going to South America to like sit in like a nice house, literally in a beautiful part of South America, and like train Peruvian military forces. Like, it's not a combat deployment. This is like, you're deploying and you're living there, but you're just sort of like a teacher. That's the gist. And that's an amazing thing to do, but it's definitely not combat. But as a result, I really didn't like mentally prepare myself for what it would be like to be in Peru. And if you don't know this, like, Peru is a totally Spanish speaking country. It's very, at least where we were, there was very little English, like very, very little. And so I remember I had to go late to Peru. So my team had gone, the group of us that was deploying there, they went early to Peru and I went like a week later. And it meant that I had to fly in to the airport in Peru by myself. And I had to like navigate the airport and I speak a little Spanish, like barely conversational. And I didn't take it seriously at all. They gave us Spanish courses. I blew it off. And I remember I got to Peru and it was like, oh my God, like as soon as I landed and I look around and no one speaks English, I'm trying to figure out where to go. Everything's in Spanish. I can't find my ride. My ride, by the way, is a local who speaks Spanish, doesn't know what I look like. And it was, and my bag got stuck and they were trying to figure out what was in my bag, but I don't speak it was so stressful. And then I finally get in the vehicle to get brought to our house we were at, but to get there, it required driving through like a true like slum, like a very, very unsafe place. And I remember thinking, like, I am in a totally foreign country. I'm so far from my family and I'm going to be here for 6 months, which is not long by, deployment standards, but that's a long time to be away. And it was like, I didn't put any thought into this. I can't believe I'm going to be here. Suddenly I felt like I was in Afghanistan again a little bit. I struggled so, so bad on that deployment with just being sane. Like, I was so miserable there. There was like, to the point where I was borderline having delusions. I was so depressed. I can't even describe it. I had this recurring dream where I'd be lying on my bed and it's always moist in Peru. Like, everything's wet. Like, no matter what, like your sheets are wet, your clothes are wet. It's like a very humid environment. And I'm like laying in my bed. I don't have a fan. It's like humid in this crappy little room. And outside, I just hear the chaos of like the Peruvian streets. And I would like fall asleep and I'd have this dream that I was in Russia, standing on the corner of this like embassy or some federal building. And somebody would come out of a car and like grab me and like hijack me and like take me hostage. But it was like over and over again. I had this dream to the point where I began to believe I was losing my mind. that like, how can I have the same dream? I'd like wake up in a panic. I missed my wife so terribly. She was pregnant with our first child. It was awful. It was like the worst time of my life. And it's hard to even now to put it into words. It was just like I had bordering on like a mental collapse. And it was in part because I just didn't appreciate the fact that like you're going to another part of the world where everything is different. And I also sort of began to confront, I guess, my demons from the deployment to Afghanistan. There was just some things that we did, that I did, that were not necessarily wrong or like illegal at all, but just like it's war, and war is like this horrible thing. And seeing it up close, man, it's rough, you know. And at the time, you're so conditioned to not only see war and be okay with it, but to practically revel in it. Because how else do you get young men to keep going to war and keep fighting and dying? You need, yeah, men and women. But it was like yeah, it was like I had like a breakdown, like a mental sort of questioning, why am I in the military? You know, questioning who I was. And so I ended up getting medically retired, and it was not really from Peru at all. It was more like I was so unhappy. I came back from Peru and I just detested the fact that I was in the military. I didn't feel like it was the place for me. I also was physically injured. I was dealing with the injuries, and I ended up getting medically retired, but it was my choice if I wanted to continue to see a therapist after I got out. And at first I didn't. At first, when I got medically retired, I just was like, whatever, I'm done. I'm on my own. But I was so angry all the time. Like just everything made me mad. I was so like on edge, not even like jumpy, but just, I was just like so high strung. And it got to the point where like nobody wanted to be around me. Like my kids didn't want to be around me. My wife didn't want to be around me. And ultimately they were like, I think you need to see somebody. And I was like, you know what? I think I do too. Like, I feel like I'm a mess. And it was through therapy that this is like 2018 or so, that I realized I had some very deep seated issues with myself, with my service, with just stuff I saw and did. And it was only when I began to sort of openly talk about those things that I actually began to sort of forgive myself and begin to feel content, like what's the word? Content again. You know, it's not about like therapy is not meant to make you forget stuff. It's to give you perspective that you didn't have. And I think I had fallen into a cycle of like just detesting who I was. And
Why?
I think that it was like, ultimately, if I were to boil it down to its simplest part, it's like I wanted to be a Navy SEAL, in part because I just wanted to go through the training. I wanted to serve in the military, but I didn't really think that hard about that. It was mostly like, I want to serve because it's an honorable thing and I know people that have done it, and that's something that means something to me. But it was really the draw to be a SEAL that was the challenge that I saw. That's the thing. It's going to take years to do it. It's like this really hard thing. It was like the idea of even contemplating what life would be like as a SEAL
Mhm.
felt like even cart before the horse. It's like, who do you think you are thinking about what it's going to be like to be a SEAL? Like, if you ever get there, you'll figure it out. And this is actually I think it's a relatively common phenomenon that the people that become SEALs, it's almost surprising. Like you become a SEAL and you're like, wait a minute, like now I'm going to be a Navy SEAL, which sounds goofy, but it's years to get to that point, and all the way up until the end. To a degree, you can not make it. You can like fail out, and so you finally become a SEAL, and you realize like the reality of the job. And I say this not because I have deep exposure to this, but because it's just true, which is in this job, people die and you kill people. Like that's kind of the gist of the job. There's way more to it than that, but it's like that's the job, guys. Like, why do you think they make video games and movies about it? And I think that there's a mental conditioning to being able to do that job that comes from training. And frankly, it's a remarkable thing that they're able to create this system that creates really capable warfighters, because that's how you protect your country. That's how you go out and do what you got to do. But when you come out of that, when you sort of, what's the word? It's almost like it's like you enter this matrix of thinking when you go through training, and you become like willing and able to fight wars, basically. But when you begin to fracture and you begin to sort of realize that you want to do something else with your life, you have to like kind of come to terms with what you have been doing and the way you've been thinking about it. You begin to view who you were as a SEAL as a person you don't, for me only, I was not proud of the person I had become. I had sort of really leaned into being as aggressive and as like, like alpha as I possibly could be, not with my teammates, but just in doing the job, that I had sort of drifted down a path that I wasn't very proud of. And I think that realizing that this wasn't a fit for me, like being in the SEALs, even though I got medically retired, I think I realized it wasn't a fit for me and I would have gotten out whether or not I was medically retired. It was really difficult to cope with that loss of identity.
Do you still have those demons?
Yeah, but I go to therapy for them. And shout out to Vinny Shorman, who actually he's based in the UK. He's my therapist. He's awesome. We haven't really delved too deeply into the military stuff, but yeah, I think that it's something that will always be with me. I certainly, when I think about having served, I'm very proud, and I'm proud to have been. I'm a veteran now, and the people I worked with were incredible. Even the people that hate me now, like it doesn't mean I think any less of them. There are incredible people in the military. I think that I just sort of it wasn't a fit for me. It was like I thought the military was, but it was the SEAL thing that drew me in. And in many ways, this is going to sound weird, but I was sort of lucky enough to get to deploy to Afghanistan and actually have a combat deployment. Because many
Mm.
people, what happens is they go to like a warfighting unit, like a special operations unit, and then they never see combat. And it's not because they made any decision, it's just the way it goes. And those people, it's sort of like they have this unchecked box,
Yeah.
but it's not their decision. And so, in a way, I was given this gift. And it sounds horrible to say it that way, but I don't know how else to say it, of getting to sort of do the job in real life. But there are sort of like, and to anybody who's listening that's done multiple deployments, like look at this guy. Like I don't claim to have like, oh, I've done 87 deployments and this is my experience. It's just from like I had one combat tour, one,
Mm.
but it was enough to show me that like that isn't what I was cut out to do. And I think that, but I still did those things and I still was that person. And now as a civilian, sort of reconciling that I'm such a different person now in a good
Mm.
way. I've taken all the best qualities I possibly could and I poured them into this person. I'm trying to be a good husband and a good dad. And I'm trying to do all the right things. But it's like I have this part of me that it's just crazy to me that I was ever a Navy SEAL. It's crazy.
Everybody has their demons to some degree, whether it's, and it's a spectrum of how strong those demons can be and
Sure.
how much control they can have over your decisions. What have you learned about dealing with demons that might be of any, because you've been to therapy.
Yeah.
A lot of people haven't.
Sure.
A lot of people maybe even haven't arrived at the awareness that they need to go yet. What have you learned about dealing with demons that might be useful to anybody listening?
That you can't talk yourself out of them. It's if you a demon to me is something that if you begin to have those thoughts and you feel them creeping in and you tell yourself stop thinking about it, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to think about that. If you have those thoughts in your life that even just the slightest beginning of a thought about that thing starts to creep into your head and your reaction to it is not now. I don't want to do this. I can't do this right now. It's all happening in your head. If that's something that you deal with, that's a demon. It's something that is like the uncontrollable thought that comes into your head. It usually happens at the same time of the day or same thing that triggers it. And if your reaction to it is, oh my God, I can't think about this thing, like that is a demon in your life. And you are not going to be able, at least in my opinion, long term, to simply convince yourself that that's not a demon. It is a demon.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if it's rational or not. For me, I have several that sort of creep into my life, but the only way I have found to sort of cope with them is to sort of not embrace them, because that's not what you do, is to talk about them with someone who it's like it's cathartic to talk about it with a therapist, but it's even more cathartic to almost hear yourself talking about it. Like you actually for me specifically, like I have things that I've said in therapy that I can't believe I'm saying out loud that are so like personal and intimate and so tied to like deep insecurities and pains in my life. But it's only in that environment with like a third party who's neutral in a private setting that these things just come to the surface and I'm saying these things. And the beautiful thing about having a great therapist is their whole gig is they're listening and interpreting and providing perspective. They're not trying to like tell you, oh, that's not a thing.
Mhm.
It's like, well, have you thought about it this way?
Mother, you mentioned earlier that you were raised by a single mother, in the
Yeah.
basement at least.
Yeah.
How has your father been a sort of key figure in the man that you are? And we talk about demons
Sure.
and the demons that you have.
So, it's funny. My dad and I recently have sort of had a resurgence. He and I sort of had, I guess you could call it a falling out. I was very close with my dad growing up. My parents split when I was 13. And even though I was living with my mom and sisters, my dad was a very active part of my life. It isn't like I didn't see him
Mm,
again, but we had like a good relationship, me and my dad. And then when I left for the Navy, it came after I had found a way to graduate college and I was talking about law school a little bit. And I think my dad, he was like, "That's great. My son, like he turned it around. He's got this career in mind that seems like a really strong idea." And I sort of sprung it on him and my mom and my sisters that I'm like, "Actually, no, when I graduate college, I'm gonna enlist in the Navy and try to be a Navy SEAL." I hadn't really talked about it with them at all. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it was
mm,
a very quick turnaround. And I didn't wanna talk to them about it because I knew they'd say, 1, "Why will you make it through?" And 2, "Why are you doing this?" And so when I began talking about it, like, right at the end of my college career, like, literally I'm getting ready to enlist, my dad, I think he couldn't quite wrap his mind around the idea that I really was gonna do this for reasons that make sense to me now that didn't at the time, like, it's his son. If you're successful, that's not good. You're gonna be a Navy SEAL, like, going to war.
mm.
If you're not successful and you wash out of training, you're stuck in the Navy in the sense that you don't get to pick another job. You kind of become needs of the Navy and you have to go do like these crappy jobs for like 4 years. Nobody likes being stuck if they don't have what's called a rate. It's like your job. So it's like he's viewing it as both outcomes sort of come with big negatives. But the way it came out to me was he doesn't believe in me. He doesn't believe I can be a Navy SEAL. Like he thinks I'm not going to make it. I'm sure that was not what he intended, but that's the way I interpreted it. And it marked like a departure in our relationship in 2010. I left for boot camp. And while he and I absolutely maintained some level of contact from 2010 until quite literally like a few months ago, I barely spoke to my dad by choice. I had a lot of ill will towards him. I always just sort of felt like he doesn't believe in me. He got remarried and he got remarried as a family. It just I had a lot of resentment towards him that some was founded, much of it was not, and it sort of became something that it never was, which is I had it in my head that my dad doesn't believe in me. That really was the thought. And it actually helped propel me to at times there were days in SEAL training where I would literally think to myself, if I don't make it, I can't even fathom what it would be like to face my dad, who in my head at the time, I'm like, he'd be like, "Told you so." Like the idea of that like made my skin crawl, you know? So in many ways, my relationship with my dad, it had become sort of negative for many years, but it sort of maintained a pretty healthy chip on my shoulder that pushed me to sort of prove him wrong in a sense. Uh, but with self-awareness recently, like very recently through therapy with my boy Vinny Shorman, and through some sort of the world lining up, he and I sort of reconnected. Uh, and we actually had some frank discussions about that. And it turns out that no, my dad just literally was worried about his son and felt like I didn't like him or love him. And we sort of drifted and life happens. I had my life, he had his life. But we've reconnected now and I'm happy for it.
There's a lot of men that aren't at the place yet where they'll speak openly about their demons and how they're feeling and their emotions and stuff. Especially, I mean, people that have been in combat and that's seen as big, tough guys, right?
Sure.
What would you say to those men that maybe, because we all feel things.
Sure.
Most of us don't have the tools to know how to talk about it.
Sure.
We don't have the environment. Maybe we don't have friends or outlets where we can talk about it. And a lot of men don't feel like they can. Even I was one of those men that probably until about the last, I'd say 2 years, I would never tell my partner if I was having a bad day.
Mm,
If I was feeling bad, if I was anxious in any way, if I was struggling with something, I would always try and shield everyone from it. Like I
yep.
thought as a man, my job was to just take it, like
Yes.
take everything, absorb, hold. But what I came to learn is that it is coming out,
Yeah.
but in with unintended consequences and in unexpected ways. It's coming out somewhere, maybe in my
Yeah.
mood, maybe in my health, maybe in my habits, maybe in my search for quick fixes of dopamine. It's going to come
Yeah.
out. So I ran the experiment one day of just like sitting my partner down and saying, "Look, I haven't been honest with you. This is how I feel, and this is what's happened. This is what I'm going through."
Yeah.
And it was such a important, pivotal experiment in my life.
I can see
because
that.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
So I'm just wondering what journey you've been on with opening up.
I think that taking men specifically as an example, you sort of have like the society, the socially acceptable things that can be demons for you.
Mhm.
That maybe we don't talk about them, but if you did, no one's really going to bat an eye. Like, it turns out I hate my job,
Mm.
and it turns out I don't love my partner. Okay, these are bad things, but they're things that if you brought them up, no one's going to question your manhood. They're not going to question, things that society views as really important, right? It's the stuff that is super personal to you that's like could be potentially embarrassing. Those are the things that are your real demons. I'm not saying those other things aren't demons. They are. They are. But if you can't talk about those things, they will dog you your whole life. They really will. And so I think it's not about you need to go sign up for therapy and go talk to a therapist. But I do think that, like you mentioned it yourself, you have to be able to sort of like unburden yourself. And part of that is simply talking about it.
Mhm.
Like, I had one, and this is not really a demon, but to give people a sense who are watching this of like how comfortable I am being forward about things that I struggle with. So, oddly enough, one of the reasons that I was also drawn to the military, believe it or not, was I struggle mightily to urinate in front of other people, just publicly going to the bathroom in front of other people. It's not like it's destroying my life, but it's uncomfortable. Like, it's easier for me if I'm alone, right? I knew this about myself at a young age, don't have a reason for it. But like, I knew when I was like in high school or like in college, like I would go to a bathroom that was private because that was easier for me. And as I got older, I was like, that's not really that normal that this is happening to me. And so part of the reason I was interested in the Navy is they drug test you and they do it really publicly. And it was like, in order to deal with this, I have to go into an organization that literally will force me to have to urinate in front of other people. But like for me, it's sort of like facing these things that are hyper personal, like
Mhm.
inability to pee in front of other people, which, I've overcome, but you have to be willing to sort of identify those things. And in my case, I talked to my wife about it before I joined the Navy, and she's like, okay. I talked to my therapist about it recently as well. But it's sort of like, that's a really specific personal thing that if I brought that up in a casual conversation, I'm sure there are people that could actually relate to it.
Mhm.
But most people would be like, this is a little uncomfortable that you brought that up. But like, everybody's got stuff that falls into that category. Maybe not specifically, but everybody's got weird insecurities, and they've got things that drive their decisions that would be to them deeply embarrassing to bring up. That is the reason you have to bring them up, because they will dog you and they will always be there until you deal with them. And for me, it's been helpful and cathartic to state them out loud and then do something about them.
The other thing I've noticed is that when I don't state them, especially in the context of a relationship, is you live misunderstood.
Yeah, that's true.
So like, I like to play out the scenario that you struggle to urinate in front of other people. Your wife might always start to wonder why you don't want to go to certain places, or
Yeah,
when you're in those places you're acting strange. She'll misunderstand that as maybe he's X, Y, and Z.
sure.
And then you're dealing with a problem. You're dealing
It's
with
totally
another set of
different.
problems. He's like, he's cheating on me. No, no, no. It's like, actually, it was just we didn't have an environment, a safe space where we could talk about the actual issue.
Very
So I've
true.
created like 5 other issues.
Yeah.
And I have that in my life where I'm like, fuck, if I just told the truth. So it's a shame that sometimes I have to get to the like bust up moment, turn around and say, you've got this totally wrong. And the reason why you've got this totally wrong is because I didn't tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And it's led you off down a path which is really unfortunate, and it's caused us more hurt than me just being honest with you.
Yeah.
But look, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I think like many of the things you've described in your story, first you have to just take one step in that direction. I'm not saying like pull your partner in and like offload to a therapist today. It's just you have to run the experiment
Yeah.
to build the evidence and have it compound and go, actually, this is a better life than secrecy.
I
or
agree.
keeping everything to yourself. There's when I interview people, there's always questions I know that they get asked all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do I ask him the question that I know he probably gets asked all the time? But you're so good at telling stories.
Yeah.
You really, really are great at
Thank
telling
you.
stories.
Thank you.
So there's really 2 questions I wanted to end with. I guess we've got a couple of minutes, but
Sure.
the first question is, to be a great storyteller,
Mhm.
and we're all telling stories whether we know it or not.
Yep.
Is there any principles that you've come to learn that you could give me to tell better stories?
Yeah. So I would say obviously the medium by which you're telling the story matters, but if we're talking about literally speaking a story, telling a story, and assuming you have people listening to that story right in front of you, which is a medium by which many of us tell stories, telling our friends, telling our family members. To tell a really good story, it has less to do with the content of the story and more to do with the delivery of that story. When I told you the Dyatlov Pass story, I was fully committed to telling you that story.
Mhm.
I didn't care if you thought it was interesting or not. I thought it was interesting enough that I was going to give you my hand gestures. I'm like going to make sure I harp on the details that I find really interesting. But it's like a level of commitment to telling that story. Like that's the key. It's commit to be like you have to be in the story. And like for example, when I did the live tour, like that's the purest form of you're either going to be awkward up there and like get through it, or you're going to fucking own the story, be in the stories, and tell it to those people right there. And they're going to hear what I want to tell them. So it's like the delivery, it's not just practice and get your words right. Hardly. Dude, I don't even use a script when I tell stories. I look at the story, I learn the story, I internalize the story, and then I inhabit the story. And when I tell you the story, it should almost feel like I was there.
Yeah.
Like that is the level of commitment you need. And I would say also like with regards to general storytelling, it really is true that it has less to do with like finessing the language so it's perfect or getting your script exactly right. It's like, I would say when it comes to most stories, you need to make sure there's some sort of payoff at the end of the story, which is sort of like storytelling 101. But if you look at the way newspapers structure stories, for those who maybe don't read the newspaper, or generally here's how it goes. This thing happened. And now I'm going to tell you the details of what that thing is and how it happened, right? That's not good storytelling. That's great for getting information across. But all too often, if you look on like YouTube or if you look at other people who tell like, mysteries, for example, sometimes in their header, it'll be like, crazy, like golden, skeleton found in cave in Russia. And like, actually, that's pretty compelling. Maybe I'd read that. But it's like, Suzanne murdered, in London, like, and then you click on it to like find out what happened. But it's like, you don't want your audience to already, in certain cases, you don't necessarily want your audience to know where the story is going. They might have a very strong inclination that Suzanne's going to get killed at the end of the story, or there's going to be a gold skeleton found in Russia. But being a storyteller, your job is to keep people invested and to build tension and to get them like ready for the payoff at the end. Any story can have a twist at the end. It depends on how you tell it. Like, it isn't like some stories have payoffs and some don't. Absolutely not. You can use point of view. You can inhabit aspects of the story that give different lenses into the story, but own the story when you tell it and ensure that there's some type of payoff at the end, whatever it is. Like when I told you the Dyatlov Pass story, like ultimately the goal is to get you to see that, wow, all these conflicting things, there's pictures of this and that, but the Russian government said an unknown, unnatural force is responsible and then close the case. The whole point of that is to say all these crazy things that are objective, they objectively happened, that we have data, we have pictures, we have all these things. I've demonstrated that to you. And clearly something's wrong and they sealed the case and no one could look into it. The whole point is to make you think, what is going on over there? But if I had said, guess what? There's this case that's sealed and no one will look into it. Here's what happened. It's the same story, but I've opened with the reveal. You got to do it the other way. So pay off at the end and own the storytelling aspect of it.
I'll go and tell people to check it out on your channel, but is there a particular story on your channel that is, this was the cliche question, that is your favorite?
Oh man.
It's like asking your favorite kids, right?
I would say the story that I'm the most proud of in terms of just how difficult it was to piece it together is the Headless Valley. And it's actually in our graphic novel as well. It isn't that it's literally the best story, but it's a story that is a composite of a whole bunch of anecdotes over about 100 years. There's this, I know we don't have enough time, but there's this place in Canada called the Northwest Territories. And so it's a part of Canada that's already very remote and it's just wilderness and forests. And there's this section called the Northwest Territories, which is even more remote. It's as big as Germany, but Germany has like 50 million residents and this has like 50,000 people there. So it's like no one lives there. And within the Northwest Territories, there's this valley, this like river that cuts through this beautiful valley called the Nahanni Valley, which has been now dubbed the Headless Valley, because over the course of like 100 years, all these people who've gone into this valley have turned up headless. They've been, but like in the most bizarre ways. and also you can't really get into this valley. It's very difficult to do. You can't fly there. You can't hike there. You have to either take a boat upstream and literally carry a boat up a couple waterfalls and then continue going upstream, or there is an overland hike, but it's like 70 miles of treacherous terrain. So it's like really hard to get there. It's totally remote. And the only other people that ever lived there were the Nahanni tribe. And one day, somebody was actually there on a hunting expedition. They noticed that the Nahanni tribe, which made up like hundreds of people, they were camped out along this river. They disappeared overnight, and literally nobody knows what happened to them. They left behind all their equipment, all their housing. It was left. They just vanished. No one knows what happened to them. And there's rumors of like white creatures wandering the woods. But I took like 7 or 8 anecdotes chronologically and pieced them all together and created what, in my opinion, is the most comprehensive narrative of what could be happening in the Headless Valley. And I'm very proud of the way it was written and put together. And it's the first story in the graphic novel as well.
We have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next, not knowing who they're leaving it for. And the question left for you is, what do you see as the most desirable future for the new media podcast world?
I would say that what I love about the podcast space that I hope continues is that it is not corporate, in the sense that it's totally like, anybody can start a podcast. We're seeing so many podcasts, but it's like podcasts rise based on the merit of those shows versus like there's not a lot of corporate pushing behind podcasts. It's sort of like the corporations show up and take the podcast or try to license podcasts that have already sort of made their place, but they don't have a lot of influence over who or what they do. So it's like it's this great meritocracy of content where the podcasts are growing and succeeding based largely on merit and skill.
Mm-hmm.
And they're covering all these topics that are like so far reaching. So it's like, it just feels sort of authentic.
Mm-hmm.
I know there are plenty of corporate podcasts out there too, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I hope that podcasting continues to be this sort of like, how in the world are like the Joe Rogan podcast and like, whatever other random podcast you want to name, like these like titans of industry, but it's like, it's so random, but it's like this beautiful product of just like human, like authenticity and willingness to talk about stuff. I love it. I think that it's a very authentic place that has not been corporatized yet.
Amen. John, thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you.
It's really, really incredible. It's really incredible. You run a phenomenal media company, which I don't think people truly understand.
Nick Witters does.
You and Nick run a phenomenal media company, which I think, I don't know if people understand the scale and size of that media company, but it's truly impressive. And you have this awesome graphic novel.
Yes, in the graphic novel, it's a New York Times bestseller. It's an anthology of 9 stories. It's beautiful, and we intend to continue making more of them. So definitely check out the graphic novel. It makes a great holiday gift.
It is absolutely gorgeous.
Thank
the
you.
illustrations and I think you call them illustrations. The illustrations are phenomenal.
Yes, we're very proud of it.
Thank you so much for all that you do. I'm someone that is absolutely enthralled by all these stories. I love mysteries, I love unsolved mysteries, and I love true crime. So, and as we were saying before we got recording, me and my partner, when she lets me listen to these things in bed, and it helps me sleep. And your channel is by far and away
Awesome.
the best at this.
Thank you.
Because you're such a gifted storyteller.
Thank you.
And as you've been speaking to me today, I've been thinking, I've been trying to piece together what makes you so brilliant as a storyteller.
Thank you.
I guess it's a long journey, a family influence, and generally,
Probably.
the experience that you've had. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for your time today as well. And it's been an honor to learn about your story of reinvention, but also to hear some of these stories.